Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was February 27th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. All right, we're getting to the end of February, and I don't know about you, but I'm really going to miss those double Fs for February. They were really fun to look at each day this month. All right, let's talk about this document. Guess what? Violant is writing to the Pope. Again. And spoiler alert, tomorrow, February 28th, she's going to write to the Pope yet again. Violant. She's like real pen pals with Clement VII, writing him almost every day, it seems. What do we make of that? Well, hopefully by the end of this year we'll make something of that. All right, so this is Violant writing to the Pope again, and this letter seems to be a pretty straightforward recommendation regarding personnel. Yeah, so there's another vacancy. So it seems like someone named Bonatus de Podio has died. And that person, I think, was somehow like maybe a bishop or somebody in Urgell. So the place name of Urgell comes up a whole lot. And Violant is recommending somebody for that post named Jacobo de Avellaneda. Oh gosh. Here's the problem is that when I'm looking at this letter, it seems to me like the last name for Jacobo is Avellaned. Avellaneda. But it is possible that the second letter of that name, that surname, is a N, so it might be Enelaneda. Oh gosh, could go kind of either way. So, well, anyway, Jacobo is apparently a stand-up fellow, and Violant goes on for a little while about how he's really qualified to take over for the dead Bonatus de Podio. And there's someone else that appears in the letter, I think the Bishop of Urgell, who's somebody else named Berenguer. Yeah, can't have too many Berengers in medieval Crown of Aragon. So Urgell is the place here being mentioned. We haven't really talked too much about Urgell. There's a count of Urgell that Joan is really close to, and over the course of his reign, he shares a lot of his treasures with. Actually, it's more like the other way around, that Joan demands that the Count of Urgell sends him a lot of treasures, especially unicorn horn. I don't know if I've mentioned the unicorn horn yet on the podcast, but Joan was a big fan. I'm not sure that he writes about unicorn horn at any point in the first year of his reign, but he might, and hopefully we'll get one of those letters, and that'll be fun to talk about because Joanne was a big believer in the power of the unicorn horn. Well, this was actually narwhal tusk, and there's a whole lot of research about that. I'll just kind of fill in some additional notes on unicorn horn in today's episode, but we are like way off on a tangent here talking about unicorn horn. It's just that one of the most funny episodes in the story of Joanne and his pursuit of unicorn horn is when he finds that the Count of Urgell, which I think is like, is it his cousin? They're related, uncle, cousin, something like that. He finds out that the Count of Urgell has obtained some unicorn horn, and he writes him to say, hand it over, give me your unicorn horn. So, moment of family tension there. So anyway, Urgell, that's all I think about when I think of Urgell. Apologies to all of the current listeners who live there. So, all right, we've got this letter. It's about an ecclesiastical position. Violant is making a recommendation. And, well, what else is there to say? I can't really pick out any subtleties here in this particular letter, even though it seems pretty long. I did try a new technique with the AI chatbots. Yep, I used basically a whole lot of resources environmentally, a lot of water probably, in order to have both Gemini and Claude work on this sort of together. So I started with Gemini. I got a transcription. I was not too pleased. Again, I mean, Gemini was doing so great a couple days ago, and now it's just flubbing it. So it got some things right. And so what I did is I had Claude do a transcription and then put Gemini's results into a reply and said to Claude, hey, I had another LLM generate a transcription. Please use it in order to identify some things that you might improve in yours. And I think that was good. I'm quite sure that there's a lot that's missing from the transcription. There's a lot that's missing in the subsequent translation. But my main goal, remember, is at this point in the initial run through of the documents to try to identify documents that I would come back to later that are really pertinent to my research question. And certainly if I'm using these chatbots, I'm going to miss some stuff that I would not miss if I was spending, multiple hours on doing the transcription and translation myself. But I would say that for a letter like this, where it seems to just kind of fit a lot of the patterns for the way that the king and queen interacted with the ecclesiastical administration and personnel changes, there's just not a lot to really work with here in terms of what I'm focused on. So I'm going to just kind of let it go with the kind of sketched out knowledge that I have about this document and maybe come back to it if it reappears in some way. Any of the people in there happen to show up again in different context, a different situation that is connected to my main research question about how Joanne and Violant ruled together. And of course, I'm always kind of flipping back and forth in the registers, trying to just develop a general sense of what else they're writing about on these same days. And maybe I'll happen upon a document from Joanne that is also about the ecclesiastical vacancy in Urgell. And then it becomes very connected to my main research question. So this might be a good time to take a step back and just remind everybody what this project is all about. Yeah, I kind of want to do that every, dozen episodes or so, and I don't think I've done it for a while. So this project is all about conveying the abundance of the archive of the Crown of Aragon. The documents that we look at every day, they are copies of the official thing that was sent out before the letter was folded and before a wax seal was applied to it. The chancery scribes would write a copy of it on a different piece of paper that would be kept. And that's what we're looking at. So for every single letter that we see in these registers, there is a twin that went out there and maybe has not been preserved. I mean, likely has not been preserved. So there are a couple that came back to the archive of the Crown of Aragon for the letters generated in the year 1387, and I was lucky enough to be able to reunite one of those to its copy because there's been a scan of each. So the outgoing letter was found its way back into the archive, and then there was the copy. So if you're interested in that, definitely go back to episode 25, recorded for January 18th. And I didn't know it when I was recording the episode that I would actually find the copy, the register copy, because I had actually chosen to use the outgoing copy for that episode. And so that was a pretty satisfying experience to reunite the outgoing copy, a digital image of the outgoing copy with a digital image of the register chancery copy. And I wrote about that on the website, even though I didn't mention it in the episode itself, because I only discovered it later kind of by happenstance. So that's a little bit about the material that we're looking at in this podcast in terms of how it was created. One thing I also want to review is that the paleography is called Gothic Secretary Hand. It's 14th century Gothic Secretary Hand, and it's like a cursive. So there are manuscripts that are produced at this time that are not in this script, but are in the, I guess what you could call like stereotypically, like what you would think of when you think of a medieval manuscript, like kind of the blocky letters. And those are scripts that are reserved for the fanciest products. And these letters that we're looking at, they are businessy. So there's not really a concern with the artistry of the written word as it appears on the page. The purpose of these documents is to record the information quickly and efficiently. And so it's a script that could be written very fast, cursive handwriting, the letters will flow together much more easily. And then also there are a ton of abbreviations, and all of those abbreviations added up will cut down on the amount of time that it takes to get letters entered in to the archival register. The abbreviations are indicated most frequently by a horizontal line across the top of the word. We call that a macron. And then there are other abbreviations that are like curved above the letter, or like a little loop, or there's a bunch of different abbreviation marks. And so you kind of get used to recognizing which marks mean which letters, or entire words can be rendered as in a mark or a kind of non-alphabetical character, so that when these scribes are writing, they're deploying all of these conventions. And fortunately for me, A lot of these have been recorded and they're quite standard. So it's pretty rare that there's some kind of unusual, novel, never before seen abbreviation in one of these letters. It all makes for a very big challenge to transcribe and translate. I'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow and some of the really wonderful resources that I have in order to help with that challenge, not just in terms of technology or in terms of glossaries, but in terms of people that have helped me out along the way. So you'll hear a lot more about that for tomorrow's document. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And to listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.